So our next speaker is Tom Getz. He's going to be talking about update on invasive weed control trials in northeastern California. Go ahead, Tom.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Whitney. Hopefully everybody can hear me now. My name is Tom Getz, and I work for UC Cooperative Extension up in the northeastern corner of California in the Intermountain region. And I thought that I'd take a little bit of time to share some results from a handful of trials that I've had going on in northeastern California, just to touch base on control of a few different weed species. So let's see here. So the trials that I'm going to talk about today, are focused mainly in grasslands and pastures. I'm going to talk about a chicory control trial, a couple of perennial pepperweed control trials, and then a Medusa head demonstration study. So chicory isn't a noxious weed species, but is considered weedy by many of the ranchers that I work with, and is pretty problematic in many of the dryland pastures and some of the lowland grasslands. It can displace some desirable forage, often, taking over some of the areas that are more dominated by perennial grasses. Up in the northeastern corner of California where I work, most of the native grasslands are perennial dominated, and it is often considered a weed. And well, there's only a couple of dots up here on the California map. The chicory really is widespread throughout this area. So I wanted to look and see, a couple of different options. Had some ranchers that were struggling with chicory control. So put out a small trial in the Honey Lake Valley to test a few different herbicide control options. Pretty standard spray trial. It was a randomized complete block design, 4 replications, 10 by 20 foot plots. And these applications were made when chicory was in the rosette stage. Generally, a lot of weeds are, effectively controlled when they have a lot of leafy vegetation, on them. And the rosette stage is when chicory has been shown to be most effectively controlled by herbicides because it gets really stemmy later in the season. So in terms of what we were seeing, I'm going to show a lot of charts like this where I have a treatment list on the side and then percent control of the weed species at different time intervals after the applications. So 2 weeks out, most everything that we tested was providing, fairly good suppression of the chicory. 4 weeks out, we started to get some differentiation between our treatments, where method looked really hot for chicory control and chicory burn down, as well as Milestone and Graze on Next, 2 products that contain aminopyrrolid, and then pretty good burn down with 2,4-D and 2,4-D and dicamba. 10 weeks after application, pretty similar results. To the 4 weeks out, where the method and Milestone products maybe just a little bit better, or pretty comparable. So just some pictures of what we were seeing out in the field. Here's a picture of the dryland pasture where the untreated check, lots of chicory in here, lots of stemmy vegetation, and not a lot of grasses. 2,4-D and dicamba, 14 weeks after treatment. Pretty good chicory control, although there's a few plants in there. And then I thought this was kind of interesting in the method plots. We had good chicory control, but we also had quite a bit of, you see this yellow flower in here, quite a bit of bird's foot trefoil, which was pretty surprising to me. I would have thought that it would have been controlled. And it was in both the 4 and the 8 ounce plots. So quantifying this, just to get a percent cover of bird's foot trefoil, all the treatments really knocked out bird's foot trefoil in that first year. 10 weeks after application, except those method treatments where we didn't have reduce the bird's foot trefoil, which is a desirable forage species. And then 13 months after treatment, where you really want to look at perennial weed control, looking at, longer term control, had really good control with the aminopyrrolid products and that method product. Not very good control with Telar, and then, decent suppression with either triclopyr or combinations of 2,4-D and dicamba. Again, what we were seeing out in the field, an untreated check 13 months out. So this is, when that chicory is still in the rosette stage, but you can see all those stems from the previous year and a little bit of bird's foot trefoil. Method, which really, released these desirable grasses as well as the bird's foot trefoil from the application. And then 2,4-D and dicamba were released the grasses from that chicory suppression, but also took out that trefoil. And again, looking at that trefoil cover 13 months out or a year after, the method treatments really released that trefoil, which was really interesting and kind of shocking to me. I expected it to be, essentially controlled in all of these plots. And then, where most of those other treatments really reduced that population. So just, his method is not typically a rangeland and pasture herbicide. It was just one that we wanted to see how well it worked for chicory. At this point, while it does have a grazing label in other parts of the country, there is not a grazing label for method in California. Maybe someday that'll come down the line, but a pretty interesting selectivity and something that I think needs to be explored further with this product. And just to throw it out there, method or aminocyclopyrrochlor is really notorious for killing conifer trees. So really one to be pretty cautious with. But in conclusion, in terms of, our chicory control, we've probably got the best control with the, aminopyrrolid products and then the method product. So shifting gears to another trial, wanted to talk a bit about perennial pepperweed and chlorsulfuron in Sierra Valley. So perennial pepperweed, Bellis noxious weed species, really good at creating these big, thick monocultures. Have a boatload of perennial pepperweed up here in northeastern California in the Intermountain region up in the Klamath Basin. And it's really problematic throughout a lot of California. Pretty white flower and deep, deep tuberous root system that is just very difficult to control. It's one of the most researched herbicide or weeds out there. There's been a tremendous amount of literature and studies looking at perennial pepperweed control because it really is one that's difficult to eliminate from an area. A bunch of good researchers have a lot of good publications. But most of the publications, as you're dealing with a perennial with that really deep root system, have focused on either herbicide applications or herbicides combined with various cultural and physical techniques. In grasslands or in areas where you have desirable grasses, the two products that are leaned on most heavily are Telar, which typically offers 2 years of good suppression with a single application in areas where you have desirable perennial grasses, or 2,4-D, which typically offers 1 year of suppression, and multiple years of treatment are needed to really get on top of it. But these two are selective to desirable perennial grass species, where other products like glyphosate and imazapyr can be selective in terms of your placement, but will control many of the grass species that you might have out there that are desirable, which is why people rely on the Telar and 2,4-D. But I kept getting some complaints, over the years that I've been here, that people weren't having good luck with Telar down in Sierra Valley, which is, just up Highway 70 from Reno, just over the California border. Which was interesting to me because up where I live here in Susanville area in the Honey Lake Valley, we have boatloads of perennial pepperweed, and Telar is the go-to. It works just great. I've had 5 or 6 different pepperweed trials over the years in the Honey Lake Valley, and just to demonstrate this point, here's Telar at 1 ounce per acre. This is the only bar I really want you to focus on. It's a pretty busy chart, but essentially in this trial, applied at the bud stage, 12 months out, we had about 90% control of perennial pepperweed with Telar, and 23 months out, we had about 75% control. 2 years after treatment with a single application of 1 ounce, which is pretty consistent with the literature. But in Sierra Valley, they were saying that they weren't getting very good control. So I put out a trial in 2018. Unfortunately, it got oversprayed by a landowner. So I put out another trial in 2019, working with the Feather River Land Trust property. And this site had perennial pepperweed on it, a couple of smaller patches, but it had a history of multiple applications of Telar over the past 20 years. They'd been out there using Telar on perennial pepperweed, and more recently, it seemed like this pepperweed was starting to persist. So I decided to implement a trial. In all honesty, I thought that they were probably just not doing their application right. Maybe they were hitting the wrong growth stage, something like that. So I went out at the bud stage, which in the literature is the most effective time to make herbicide applications to perennial pepperweed when you got a lot of growth and really is stressed that root system. They didn't have huge patches. I was only able to do 3 replications at 10 by 20 foot plots, but again, pretty standard randomized complete block design, applied in June of 2019. And it looked pretty much like I expected the first year. Untreated, nice, beautiful white flowers on the perennial pepperweed. 2,4-D offers really good burn down of perennial pepperweed. People like it because you can see the effect really quickly, but you don't tend to get very good control of the root system unless you make multiple applications. And then Telar chlorosulfuron gave us a good flower suppression, and we were starting to see quite a bit of chlorosis on the plants a month out, which is typically what I expect. It's a pretty slow acting herbicide, but when you come back the next year, you typically have good results. So 1 year after treatment, 2,4-D looked about like I would expect, really suppressed this pepperweed with just a few stems coming up in the area that had been treated. But what I was not expecting was to have a lot of perennial pepperweed come up where I applied 2.6 ounces of Telar. So this is 2.5 times what I applied and got 90% control in the Honey Lake Valley. This is the max label rate, and essentially, maybe a little bit of suppression, but wasn't seeing very good control. So this is just a graphic, showing percent control where we got pretty good suppression with 2,4-D like I'd expect, not 100% control, and then much less suppression than I expected with 3 different Telar applications. So I thought, well, let's see what it looks like if we do it again. So I decided to retreat all of the plots with the exact treatment that had been put out there the first time. So 2 years of the max label rate for Telar and 2,4-D in those respective treatments. And 30 days out, again, kind of what I would expect. Here's an untreated plot where you see a lot of white flowers. In the Telar treatment, we got good flower suppression, and those plants were starting to turn chlorotic. And 2,4-D, again, good burn down, which is what you'd expect. This is 30 days after the second treatment. We're 1 year after the second treatment in that perennial pepperweed plot. It's like you couldn't even tell that you'd made an application. Yet 2 years in a row, we'd gone out with the max label rate of chlorosulfuron on this patch right here. And it didn't even really look like we had done anything. Where 2,4-D was giving us about what we'd expect. So, just in terms of the numbers that we put to it, good suppression with 2,4-D, and then not a whole lot of anything with any of our Telar applications, maybe a little bit of suppression. So what's happening? And, this is a really good question. I actually don't know exactly what's happening on this site, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to share it. It's a pretty unique soil type, 10 to 13% organic matter. It sits down in the bottom of Sierra Valley. There is potentially something that's going on with the unique soil type. Telar will bind to organic matter. So potentially with this really high organic matter, maybe we're getting limited root bud absorption from material that's on the soil surface. But it's not an explanation for the lack of foliar translocation of the chlorosulfuron, which is, to my understanding, the main way that product gets down into the root and kills the pepperweed. Where the other side of things that might have something going on is that there really has been a history of Telar application in the valley and on this site, multiple applications, throughout the years. And so I'm not saying it's probable, because there's only been a couple instances of rangeland herbicide resistance occurring, especially with perennial weeds. But it is possible that herbicide resistance could be a factor in here. So I'm just starting to delve into this year, so stay tuned, but starting a small pot trial in a greenhouse, dug up some plants from Sierra Valley and the Honey Lake Valley that we're going to treat and see, first herbicide resistance screening. I'm really hoping they both die and there's something else going on for why this chlorosulfuron or Telar isn't working, because it'd be a bad deal. And certainly welcome feedback. If anybody has had bad luck with chlorosulfuron and perennial pepperweed, really would like to hear about it, because most of the people that I've talked to have had good success, except in Sierra Valley. And I also wanted to talk just a little bit about perennial pepperweed and milestone. Let me see how I'm doing on time. I've heard a lot of people saying that milestone, it works pretty well on perennial pepperweed. But there's no mustards on the milestone label. And I've actually gotten into some discussions with people about it. I've thrown it in a couple of different trials, never had good luck with it, but I keep hearing it. So wanted to see what it looked like. Looking at a fall versus bud stage treatments for perennial pepperweed, because some people were telling me that it worked really well in the fall. So I had a trial at the Honey Lake Valley Wildlife Area where I put out some treatments in the bud stage and then some fall treatments in late October. Again, pretty standard design, and just wanted to see what it looked like. 30 days after treatment with the bud stage applications, just had 4 treatments in this trial. Maybe a little bit of suppression with milestone, and then pretty good control with 2,4-D and Telar. And then 60 days out, the plants had dried down quite a bit. It was kind of hard to see what was going on. But 12 months after treatment, when we came back, really looking at what it looks like after the fact, essentially didn't see any impact from milestone applications. Where I saw about 75% control with 2,4-D and a 95% control with Telar, which is what I would have expected to see in Sierra Valley. So here's a picture of the untreated check. Horrendously dry year. I don't have to tell anybody. So this pepperweed is a bit stressed, but pepperweed with some little flowers in here 12 months after application in the untreated. Milestone, can't really tell a difference. Where Telar, giving us some nice bare ground. It'd be desirable if we would have had some rain and some of these grasses could have grown, but we did control the pepperweed with that bud stage application. Where our fall treatments came back and looked at them 8 months after, had pretty good suppression with Telar and not a whole lot of suppression with milestone or graze on next to aminopyrrolid products. And then 11 months out again, maybe some suppression with Telar, not great control, and not a whole lot going on with those aminopyrrolid applications. So here's a Telar 8 months out, really thin that pepperweed out with a fall application, but not nearly as much activity as when we did a bud stage application. And then milestone not having a lot of impact. So would certainly be interested if people have data showing that milestone works well on pepperweed, but from the this trial and then the couple of trials that I've had, I wouldn't recommend it. There's nothing on the label. But milestone is a great product for a bunch of other plants. Really good on thistles and knapweeds and grasslands. And more recently, in the past 10 years, there's been quite a bit of work done with a Medusa head in milestone by Matt Ranella, Guy Kaiser, Josh Davey. Been doing quite a bit of work with milestone, and it's really exciting stuff. They've looked at 2 different application timings: a fall application of pre-emergent rates, so really high rates, the spot label rate going out as a pre-emergent treatment is shown to work really well in the Sierra foothills. And then boot stage applications for seed head suppression. So, they've had really good luck with fall treatments in other areas of the state. I thought I'd share my experiences in the Intermountain region. So I've had a couple of different trials where I've gone out with the 14-ounce rate of milestone put out before the Medusa head germinates, where they've had 95% control in some other areas. In the first year that I did it at a couple of sites in 2017. If you remember back, 2017 was a really wet winter, and I didn't see what all the fuss was about. 8 months after treatment, I was only seeing 20% control at one of my sites, where 8 months out at another site, I was seeing some suppression, but certainly not the lights out control they were seeing in other areas. So here's a picture from one of those trial sites, 8 months out. This is milestone at 14 ounces as a pre-emergent treatment. A lot of Medusa head in here intermixed with some perennial grasses. But had some other trials that I put out this past year in 2020, which was a pretty dry winter. Again, that 14-ounce rate, which is only labeled for spot treatments, but put it out at a couple of different sites. I saw excellent or much better control. 76% at one site and 70% at another site. Here's a picture of one of those sites where, there wasn't hardly any Medusa head growing in here as a pre-emergent treatment, just a couple of plants. So I was pretty satisfied with this, and I'm excited to see that it was working up in my area as well. But where I think there's a lot of promise for milestone and Medusa head is what they've been doing with the boot stage applications. We've known about synthetic auxins altering grass head seed formation for quite a long time, which is why you can't use 2,4-D when you're growing small grains in the boot stage, because when that seed head is developing and you put that synthetic auxin herbicide on it, you get all kinds of seed head malformation, which of course, if you're growing grain, isn't a good thing. And so I'm not sure exactly how they stumbled on it, but they've shown the same thing with milestone and Medusa head. Applications at the boot stage have been shown to be really effective at reducing the amount of seed set. Doesn't kill the plants, but they've shown, less than 5% viable seed. There's a really interesting article by Matt Ranella and Guy Kaiser going into the details of their studies. So up here in the Intermountain region, we have a lot of sage grouse habitat, a lot of federal land, and the federal agencies are really limited with what they can do for Medusa head. So we thought we'd do a demonstration trial to see how this boot stage applications looked like in some of our sage grouse habitat. So did a trial looking at applications of the boot and head stage, a couple of different rates, applied 2 years in a row. Medusa head's supposed to have a 2-year soil seed life. So if you can reduce the seed set for 2 years in a row, maybe you could make some difference. And then did a little bit bigger plots, 20 by 40 foot randomized complete block design. And this is a picture of out at our study site. You see these wild burrows out when you're in Eastern California all the time. So here's a picture of the plot after one of the treatments. And you can see a little bit of purplish going on in here. There was some effect compared to the untreated check behind it. And you could certainly see the color difference after treatment, but it was kind of hard to tell exactly how much control there was besides, breaking apart individual seed heads and seeing if there was a blank seed or not a blank seed in there. So did some control estimates and, certainly got what I'd say, some suppression out of our applications, but then also wanted to do a germination trial. So collected some seeds from the untreated check in the treated areas and, grew them up in a greenhouse. And we were seeing, pretty similar results to what they were seeing in that Ranella paper where we were getting really good germination, about 92% germination in our untreateds, where, at the boot stage, we were getting less than 10% germination, and then, less than 10% germination at the higher rate of the heading stage, where it was applied when the Medusa head had come out. So in 2021, made applications again. I took some, percent controls where at this point it looked like the 7-ounce rate was sticking out a little bit just visually. Here's a picture of the trial. You could certainly see these big blank squares where we had really suppressed seeds the year before and there hadn't been that much germination. Again, it was a really dry year though, so things were kind of patchy. Even in the untreated check, we had some patchy growth. At this site, I think there was only 4 inches of rain about approximation this past growing season. So things were a little bit different. And we were seeing little pockets of Medusa head coming in here and there. Here's one of the areas where a boot stage application was made. And, there's just one big robust plant that came in here. So we collected seeds, did another germination trial, and things were a little bit different this year. Whitney, I think, has given me the hook. With that, we had a little bit more variable germination. But yeah, it is interesting, really interesting to see that we did really have an effect, and it'll be interesting to see how this affects Medusa head recruitment the following years. And I think I probably went over time, so I'll answer any questions in the chat.